He's a locomotive engineer who has worked in freight and passenger service since 1998. He started with Conrail as a brakeman in 1996, was promoted to conductor in 97, and became a locomotive engineer the following year. He has run trains in 9 states over the rails of all of the Class 1 railroads. He served as secretary of the Railroad Workers United beginning in 2008, and he is now the organization's general secretary. Please welcome Ron Kaminkow. Did I say your name correctly?
It's Kaminkow, Jimmy, but everybody gets it wrong.
Okay. Well, let me so I'm glad you're here, because here's a recent story from NPR. Here's the most thorough explanation yet of the train derailment. So what happened was the operators of a Norfolk Southern train carrying hazardous chemicals near East Palestine, Ohio, this month tried to stop the train after a wheel bearing overheated to a dangerous degree. But by the time an alarm rang to alert the crew of the danger, the bearing was already so compromised that it failed as the train was still coming to a stop, officials said. A preliminary report released by the NTSB Thursday stopped short of declaring a conclusive cause of the derailment, but the report, along with additional details shared by officials together, offered the most detail. Okay. So in response to this, now the railroad workers want them to do something. So 3 weeks after the lives of East Palestine, Ohio residents were upended by a fiery wreck involving blah, 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 blah. In a statement, Railroad Workers United pointed to the NTSB's newly published preliminary report on February 3rd crash and subsequent burn-off of vinyl chloride and other carcinogenic chemicals, which suggests that an overheated wheel bearing likely caused the derailment. The Inter-Union Alliance of Rail Workers cited the NTSB chair, Jennifer Homedy, who said Thursday at a press conference that this was 100% preventable. So that big environmental catastrophe that is poisoning all the people in East Palestine, Ohio, was 100% preventable. This was not an accident. Every single event that we investigate is preventable. That's what the chair of the National Transportation Safety Board said. RWU, Railroad Workers United, which has previously highlighted how industry-led deregulation and Wall Street-backed policies such as precision scheduled railroading have made the U.S. railroad more dangerous. The Class 1 freight rail carriers, including Norfolk Southern, have prioritized profits over safety, cutting maintenance, equipment inspections, and personnel in all crafts while increasing the average train size to 3 miles or more. In the words of RWU co-chair Gabe Christensen, rail workers experience firsthand every day the dangers inherent in this style of railroading. It has impacted their safety, health, state of mind, and lives on and off the job. Limits on train lengths and weights are necessary to prevent catastrophic derailments. Jason Dore, General Secretary of RWU, echoed the message, saying, every day we go to work, we have serious concerns about preventing accidents like the one that occurred in Ohio. As locomotive engineers, conductors, or signal maintenance cars, blah, 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 we experience the reality that our jobs are becoming increasingly dangerous due to insufficient staffing, inadequate maintenance, and a lack of oversight and inspection. We recognize that limits on train lengths and weights are necessary to prevent catastrophic derailments. 1 week ago, RWU made the case for nationalization, arguing nationalizing the railroads, meaning that would no longer be privately owned. I'm arguing that the United States can no longer afford private ownership of the railroads. The general welfare demands that they be brought under public ownership. Specifically, the RWU called on regulators and lawmakers to ensure sufficient staffing to do the job properly, efficiently, and safely, with all trains operating with a minimum of 2-person crew. They operate with less than that. Anyway, if they could get a half a person to run a train, I guess they would. They want to cap train length and weight at a reasonable level to mitigate the increased likelihood of breakdowns, train separations, and derailments. Implement adequate and proper maintenance and inspections of locomotives and rail cars, tracks and signals, wayside detectors, and other infrastructure, and standardize ample training and time off without harassment of draconian attendance policies. Of these measures, only a proposed rule to require two-person crews, described by RW as loophole-ridden, was included in the blueprint the United States Department of Transportation unveiled Tuesday to hold rail companies accountable and protect the well-being of workers and fence-line communities. The Department of Transportation also encouraged rail carriers to voluntarily provide sick leave. Norfolk Southern, facing intense scrutiny and backlash amid the ongoing East Palestine disaster, agreed Wednesday to provide up to a week of paid sick leave per year to roughly 3,000 track maintenance workers. But because the Biden administration and Congress recently imposed a contract without paid sick leave on rail workers who are threatening to strike, the vast majority still lack the basic life-saving benefit, as do millions of private sector workers in other industries who are also waiting legislation to address the issue. The RW Treasurer Hugh Sawyer reiterated the call on Friday. We demand that the railroad be run safely, efficiently. So let me bring in Ron. Ron, what? So that seems to me to be amazing that of all the, even in the disaster that happened in East Palestine, and it seems like on a weekly basis, there's another train derailment or disaster happening somewhere in the United States. The only thing you could get was them to agree to two people running a 3-mile long train, two people. So now they have less than two people sometimes. You could take it anywhere you want, Ron.
Okay, yeah, first of all, there's a misunderstanding. The Class 1 railroads have never run trains with less than two.
Okay.
They have wanted to, and they first floated the idea in 2004, but it has to be bargained with the unions. And so we have actually been able to hold them off for almost a generation. Like I say, November 1st in 2004, they first proposed this idea. But very few rail operations, excluding captive railroads, mining railroads, and some short lines, have actually been able in the U.S. and Canada to run with a single employee. So we have held them off. But if they get their way, one of the things that they have been pushing for, and they feel very confident and cocky they're going to get it, although the last few months have maybe put things in our favor. They would love to see all of these mainline freight trains, including the one that derailed at East Palestine, run with a single employee.
I didn't even know that was an option.
I didn't know it either.
Oh my God.
I thought there was at least a couple of guys running every train, or at least one guy in the caboose. They don't even have cabooses anymore. Have you noticed have they gotten rid of cabooses, Ron? Or am I just imagining that?
Oh yeah, cabooses went away back in the 1980s, along with the full 4 or 5 person crew. So the caboose came off, the brakeman and the conductor ended up on the head end. So you had a 3-person crew. And then basically in the early 90s, the last time that we almost had we did have a national railroad strike, that was the end of the third pin. And we generally now have a conductor and engineer on through freight, over the road freight, just 2 employees in the cab of a locomotive.
So what is the RWU plan on doing? What can you do to? I mean, it seems like the government has completely abandoned the railroad workers. It seems, and so what can you do now?
Well, I wouldn't say that the government was ever on the side of the railroad workers. You know, we hear a lot of talk all the time, like take our country back. This nostalgia to go back to the good old days when we played fair and workers had all these rights, and it really just doesn't exist. It's part of the mythology or the fantasy, I think, of many cultures, including ours. And so, yeah, the railroad industry has largely been, deregulated. Both political parties are complicit. The ICC is gone, replaced by the Surface Transportation Board. And the Federal Railroad Administration, one could argue, has been captured, quote unquote, by the rail industry. For example, in the previous administration under Donald Trump, we had Ron Batori. Well, Ron Batori had been a CEO of railroads his entire life. So it's an obvious example of the fox guarding the hen house. So this is what we're up against, a very, very powerful industry that has extreme wealth to bestow upon different politicians of both political parties. And a lot of that is coming out, Jimmy, and it's pretty exciting to actually see the numbers and see the figures in a bunch of articles that have come out as recently as the last few days about the intensity of their lobbying efforts to get the government to not regulate them, to get safety rules and regulations either not adopted or the existing ones modified or done away with altogether. So this is what we're up against.
So this is just straight up corruption. This is a system we have in the United States of legal bribery, where corporations and railroad tycoons can give money to the people who write the rules and set the laws in Congress, and then of course that's not democracy. That's called corruption. And so that's what we're living in right now. That's why something like East Palestine can happen. And instead of Joe Biden going to East Palestine, he goes to Kiev and gives them $10 billion.
They got to fix their railroads.
They got to fix their railroads in Ukraine.
Get their pensions.
And get their pensions and clean water. So there's a call to nationalize the railroad. How is that got the support of the rank and file, and who came up with the idea?
Well, Railroad Workers United has debated this question for well over a decade. Public ownership in this country has a black eye, even though there's lots and lots of things in this country that actually are publicly owned, like our transportation system, the highways, the waterways, the airports, the seaports. All of this is publicly held. And if you notice, there's not a whole lot of movement amongst Democrats or Republicans to privatize the highways. But the way I'm fond of putting it is this. Imagine if Schneider Trucking owned Highway 80, and imagine if J.B. Hunt owned Highway 70, and imagine if UPS owned Interstate 25. This is what we have on the railroad. Union Pacific owns the infrastructure. They own the main line. So across middle America, through Nebraska, Wyoming, and well, here where I live in Nevada, it's all Union Pacific. It used to be Western Pacific, Southern Pacific, and so forth, Rio Grande, but it's all Union Pacific, and it's got one competitor, and that's BNSF. And BNSF doesn't necessarily serve the same customers or come through the same territory. And so, in effect, the railroad system is a monopoly. And the agreement was originally the U.S. government was going to give all of these millions of acres to the rail industry to develop the country. And in return, they would be a common carrier and carry freight and passengers of anybody who's interested in shipping. Here's what's happened in recent years, and it's been escalated by precision scheduled railroading. There's this thing called the operating ratio, and the railroads are fixated. There's what's called the fetish of the operating ratio, and they want an operating ratio down as low as 0.5. And that means for every dollar they take in, they want 50 cents profit. And if they can't get that 40 or 45 or 50 cents profit, they do not want your freight. Thank you. And so I got a statistic here that I think is fascinating. In 2006, the rail industry reached its peak of carloads shipped. 32.1 million carloads were shipped on the railroad in 2006. You'll never believe it, but that is the most ever shipped. So in the last 16 years, we're moving less freight. So in 2022, the rail industry shipped 25.4 million carloads, which by my math is 79% of what they shipped almost a generation ago. So for every 5 cars that they moved in 2006, they're only moving 4 carloads now. They're making a mess of it. They're not doing a very good job. They don't have enough rested crews to move their trains. Last year was almost a national meltdown. And so if you look at this and say, what in the hell are we doing as a society, as an economy, allowing a private industry, a cabal of 4 major rail carriers? Basically, they got the country by the balls. They got the industry of this country up against the wall, and the American people are paying the price while record profits every quarter are turned in, and it's based upon what do they do with those profits? Do they double track the railroad? Do they electrify? Do they extend sidings, increase the ability of the trains to get from point A to point B in a hurry? Good customer service, reliability? Hell no. All they have done is taken their profits and bought back stock, pumping their stock up to records unheard of in the rail industry in 150 years. This is the rail industry we have in this country. I would postulate it is a basket case. It's not operating in the interest of the country, and therefore it should be operated in the public interest like our rest of our transportation infrastructure.
And so, the way that to get something like this implemented would be you would have to protest and you would have to shut down the railroad. So the way you get things done in a country where the government is run by capitalists is you have to stop capitalism in order for them to bend to your will, like the truckers did in Canada, in a sense. What do you see a willingness of workers to do something like that?
Well, I was on a Zoom call, including the president of the United Electrical Workers Union, Carl Rosen. And what Carl said is what I believe. Is this going to happen tomorrow or overnight? We don't know. But we're building a movement. We're building a movement of working people, not just in rail, but perhaps the energy sector as well, and many other sectors of the economy that for years have run amok and run roughshod over the American people. So we aim to change that consciousness. How many of my brothers and sisters on the railroad right now would agree with nationalization, public ownership? I'm not sure. But as Railroad Workers United propels this campaign forward, and more people learn, for example, about the history of nationalization in this country. And if I might, I just want to read a few statistics, and this is out of our resolution we adopted back in October. So the rail industry was actually once publicly owned, just for a few years during World War I. It was so popular that the railroad workers' ranks at that time voted in a national plebiscite. We had a lot more railroaders at that time. But in December of 1918, the combined total of railroad workers from all the crafts and all the unions voted 306,720 in favor of nationalization of the railroad, with just 1,466 wanting them to go back to public ownership. This is at the end of World War I. The AFL convention at that time in 1920 voted 29,000 and something to 8,000 in favor, once again, of keeping the railroads under public ownership. And so there was this thing called the Plum Plan. And Plum was a representative. He was a lawyer. And his idea was, instead of having these private Wall Street and today's hedge funds, for example, owning and running the railroad in the interest of private capital, let's have them run with a tripartite board of directors, which had a third of the board appointed by the feds to be in the interest of the American people. A third were railroad managers. And interestingly, a third were actually representatives of workers themselves through the trade unions. And so this would be really as American as apple pie. It's self-ownership, it's self-initiative, it's workers taking control and a personal interest in their own industry. So I highly recommend people study up on the old Plum Plan. It's a faded piece of history from 100 years ago, but it provides us, I believe, with a model that we could work from today to provide a much more efficient and safe, modernized railroad system that actually functions not in the interest of Wall Street hedge funds, but in the interest of workers, trackside communities like East Palestine, of course, shippers, passengers, and the environment.
And so, what in the near future? What is the RW, the Railroad Workers United? What do you plan on doing politically? Do you have any? I knew there was talk about a new party, a third party. What do you, because you vote if you supported the Democrats, and then the Democrats crushed your union using fascist tactics. They got in bed with the tycoons of the railroad and they crushed the workers. And so you can't go Democrat again, and you can't go Republican. So what do you do? Let me just before I throw it to you, Shama Sawant. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's the Seattle. So if you are, she's the Seattle City Council, and she's going to trying to start a nationwide workers movement. So go ahead. What do you do politically?
Yeah, I'm in touch with her, and it's the Workers Strike Back, and we hope to, cooperate in coalition with them to bring all these issues forward. It's the age-old question, Jimmy. I mean, we have been screwed by Tweedledee and Tweedledum, Democrat and Republican, for well over 100 years. And like I pointed out on the show when I was there, and back in, I think it was October or November, Democrat and Republican administration alike have broken our strikes, have ordered us back to work, and have played the game of, we're going to regulate and rein in the rail industry. But in fact, the rail industry actually emerges victorious in so many cases. The great socialist and the great labor leader Eugene V. Debs once said, "I would rather live in a society where the government owns the railroads than a society where the railroads own the government." And we have seen this time and time and time again. So I was at the Labor Party founding convention in Cleveland in 1995, 96, I forget which year, I think it was 96. And one of the unions that was actually party to the founding of the Labor Party, and it was somewhat stillborn, doesn't really function to the best of my knowledge these days, but it was a great idea. And the idea was that unions and working people would front our own political party. And the slogan was, "The bosses have two parties, we need one too." And so the Track Workers Union, the BMWE at the time, was one of 4 or 5 unions, including the mine workers, who have had their strikes broken by, the great Democrat Jimmy Carter, for example. The United Electrical Workers Union, which has always been a very, very outspoken, progressive left-wing union, and I think the California nurses. But interestingly, we actually did have a rail union participate at that time in the founding of a third party. Whether rail labor will actually take part in the founding of a new party remains to be seen. Now, for Railroad Workers United's part, for whatever it's worth, our little organization did talk with people from the People's Party a few years ago. And while we are not a member of the People's Party, or nor do we support or endorse any political party at this point in our history, we did promulgate a resolution that says railroad workers need to investigate the options that are before us to start a new political party. And we support the movement for a People's Party to investigate what those prospects are. And we would support the movement of just about any third party movement that is based in working people, railroad workers in particular, because our faith in the two-party system, after decades and decades of being screwed by it, is close to zero.
Well, I wish you well on this. The railroad is the glue that holds capitalism together in this country, and of course capitalism eats itself, and of course they're turned into a monopoly, and of course they're not taking care of the infrastructure. So again, people don't realize how corrupt our government is. It's 100% corrupt, which is why this railroad system can be like this. We don't have bullet trains like the rest of the world, the advanced world. We don't have anything like that. And what we do is we have a crumbling infrastructure, and where they're putting 1 and 2 people on 3-mile-long railroad cars. And the Democrats are just as bad as the Republicans. They all work for the same people. Ron, Kaminkow, I really hope you could get something done with the Railroad Workers United. I hope you can start a workers' party. I hope you can join with Shama Sawant. I hope that we really need workers to join together and shut things down in America to get things done. And that's the only thing that they care about. And we all know that. And you know that railroad strike was going to work. And that's why they had to come in and crush it. That's why Joe Biden and the Democrats had to crush your strike before it happened, because it was going to work. And so with that knowledge, doesn't it make you all want to do it anyway?
Well, I can't speak for everybody, of course, Jimmy, but there was a huge, huge pent-up anger and frustration that has been building for at least 2 decades now. Draconian attendance policies, massive furloughs, layoffs, job consolidations, all all of us going to work knowing we don't have the proper tools to do the job, lack of maintenance, lack of inspection. I know signal maintainers and car inspectors that are just furious and very demoralized with the inability to do the job as they were trained to do it, and as they understand that the law says they are to do it, to say nothing of government or rail carrier policy and procedure. But there's all this pressure from the top to, once again, the cult of the operating ratio, to cut corners. Don't inspect, don't maintain. We don't have enough staff to do the job properly. Get the train out, get it over the road. And so obviously by the strike votes that were taken back in the fall and just the outrage, you know that so many railroad workers wanted to finally collectively exercise their muscle and their strength and their solidarity and make an expression to the carriers and to the government. Unfortunately, we didn't even get a day on the picket line. But maybe next time we will. But this is something I think that most railroad workers are itching for a fight, because we know we can win and we know that we deserve better. And so, you know, we're not counted out yet. We'll see what happens, of course, in the next round of bargaining.
Well, I hope you do strike. I hope you strike anyway, and because it would set a tone for the entire country, if not the entire Western world. You would win the strike. You would get whatever you wanted, and I just wish you would do it. I wish you would. This would be on the agenda number one for the RWU, is to strike anyway. And just to get just basic safety measures taken care of. I wish you would do it, and the government, you would break them. You would win. There's no doubt about it. You would win. And so I would encourage someone to be more militant at the railroad union, and I would hope you do it. Ron, I really appreciate you coming on. I'm sorry we don't have more time today. We got to run to get to our next guest, and you're welcome back anytime.
All right, Jimmy, I'll take you up on that. We got a lot to talk about.
Yes, we do. Okay, thanks again.
Thank you.
If you want to see my stand-up special, become a member at jimmydore.com. It's only $10, and come see our live stand-up comedy in Los Angeles, Palm Springs, Milwaukee, St. Paul, Honolulu, Northampton, Massachusetts, Syracuse, Cohoes, New York, Hartford, and more.